Today we are talking about one of the most breathtaking places in the world, New Zealand. Most fun and one of the greatest rivalries when it comes to New Zealand, North Island versus South Island. How would the climate be different, you reckon?
It depends on what you want to do. Like I mentioned, you want to ski, go in July. You want to enjoy summer, maybe even the beaches in New Zealand, which is something we don't talk about. Then go in December or Jan. And if you just want to enjoy nature, go all throughout the year. And you can do whale watching too.
Say go to New Zealand for the adventure. We say go to New Zealand for the landscape. We say go to New Zealand for the friendly people. But often people forget that New Zealand has great food and great wine.
Wellness is a very big part of what you would do in Rotorua and the Maori culture, because you have Tekuia, you have Wakariwariwa, all these places where you can see the hot geysers as well.
Next trip, what would you like to do?
The third island of New Zealand.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Travel, Explore, Celebrate Life. Today we are talking about one of the most breathtaking places in the world, New Zealand. But we have done a lot of episodes on Travel, Explore, Celebrate Life about New Zealand. But this episode is going to be a little different. We are going to talk about one of the most fun and one of the greatest rivalries when it comes to New Zealand, North Island versus South Island. Which one is better? Which one should you visit? Should you visit only one or should you visit both in one trip itself? So let's figure all of this on this episode. But before that, let's start with a wild fact. Did you know that the North Island and the South Islands of New Zealand, they are inching closer to each other by a few centimeters every single year? In our lifetime, will we see them join? Probably not. So today on this episode with Sunila, let's find out the differences between these islands and find out which one you should pick or whether you should do both in a single trip. Let's begin. So Sunila, this episode, North Island versus South Island, how would you like to start? And let me ask you a frank question. Are they really different?
Neil, I think this is a question that applies not only to New Zealand, I think it's to every country, right?
Yeah.
Whenever you're thinking, you're always comparing, is the North different from the South? And if you look at India itself, there is a stark difference in terms of, the landscape, the geography, the people, the way we dress, everything. But then India is a much more diverse land. In New Zealand, also, there is a difference. And again, it goes back to geography. So, what you see and do in the North Island and the South Island are completely different. Yes, there are a few common things, but the North is all about geothermal activity. New Zealand is one of the youngest countries on earth.
Yeah.
So, you everything to do with geothermal activity. So, like Iceland, you're thinking geysers, you're thinking hot pools, you're thinking hot beaches, even. All of that is the North Island. And with the South Island, it's more about alpine landscapes. So think maybe like Switzerland. So you have lakes, you have mountains, you have snow, picturesque places, long roads to drive on, and all of that. So there is a difference for sure, and it is really tough to choose where do I go. And we'll come to it, of course, at the end of the
Okay,
episode.
yeah, I mean, over the course of the
Yeah.
episode, we'll discuss a lot of these things. Now, I'm glad you mentioned that the North Island is different to the South Island because often people are wondering whether they should only stick to the North Island, whether they should only stick to the South Island. You can do both of these islands in many different ways, right? You can fly from city to city. You can do self drives in New Zealand. You can hop onto like coach tours that will take you through a particular part of the island. So let's start with what the climate is like between both of these. I remember going to Auckland one time. I remember going to Christchurch and doing a nice road trip around South Island. How would the climate be different, you reckon?
Sunil, overall, I would say there's not too much difference between the two islands. Of course, the south can be much colder
Yeah.
because the north is closer to the equator, and the south island, of course, is closer to the southern pole in that sense. So the temperatures can definitely be cooler in the south island and a little warmer. When I'm saying a difference, maybe 4 5 degrees, so not too much. But of course, the very northern tip of New Zealand, it enjoys kind of warmer waters.
Yeah.
And in fact, here at Cape Ranga, you can see the two oceans meet. So you have the Tasman Sea and then you have the Pacific Ocean, and you see them, come together at this point. So in terms of weather, I think more than, is there a difference between the two islands? What's important to remember is that New Zealand is in the southern hemisphere. And we've discussed this, but I'd just like to repeat it here again. And that means that, everything is opposite to the northern hemisphere.
Yeah.
So, like if we are in March and April and we are celebrating spring here, then you will get the fantastic autumn colors in New Zealand. Like I remember, usually whenever I've gone, it's been around May or April. And at that time, you have like Queenstown, Arrowtown, and all these places which are just filled with all the autumn colors. So, really, New Zealand it's a great time to go any time of the year. What you see is going to change. If you want to see spring, then go maybe October, September, October, and then summer is January, February, and then of course winters June, July. So if you want to go skiing, then head to New Zealand in June and July, which is the peak of summer in the north. So really the best time of the year, there's no such best time. It's great all through the year. It depends on what you want to do. Like I mentioned, you want to ski, go in July. You want to enjoy summer, maybe even the beaches in New Zealand, which is something we
Yeah.
don't talk about, then go in December or Jan. And if you just want to enjoy nature, go all throughout the year.
Yeah, because I've always mentioned this, right? Like, you may be the worst photographer in the world, but when you're in New Zealand, you'll still get the best photos because the scenery, the landscapes are just like that. And I think for all of the research that I was doing for this episode, right? Every single blog, every single video that you watch, even every single traveler review that you watch, they will always tell you that the scenery is amazing, but at the same time, at every turn, it is different. Because sometimes you're driving for like 4 hours, you're seeing the same scenery, it can get kind of boring, right? And I don't think you feel that with New Zealand. So, between these two islands, right, I have a small outline that I have created, and I wanted to ask you certain questions. So, in terms of points of entry into New Zealand, which are some of the points in North Island, which are some of the points in South Island that you could fly to? Maybe say there's no direct flight from India, but there are flights from Singapore, there are flights from Hong Kong, Kuala Lumpur. So what are the points of entry for either of these islands?
That's a really good point, and it's a good start. And I would say two main entry points. You have Auckland and then you have Christchurch. Not all airlines fly to Christchurch. So, depending on what deal you're getting, look at where you can fly in and then choose what you want to do. Which also means that if you just want to do North Island, you'll go to Auckland. If you just want to visit South Island, you'll go to Christchurch. And if you want to do a round trip or you want to do both the islands, then you can come into Auckland, come out of Christchurch as well, or again fly back to Auckland, because sometimes, like Bombay, Auckland, Bombay fare is going to be so much cheaper than doing other ways. So look at what's really working for you.
Yeah.
But Auckland and Christchurch are going to be the two main entry points. Sometimes you can fly into Queenstown as well, but in my experience, look at the weather and think twice, because even though it's convenient, like even from Christchurch to Queenstown, you can fly both ways. But I was in Queenstown and there was a storm, and then the flights didn't take off. So I ended up driving for those 6 hours from Queenstown. So I feel, and driving is so much easier and so beautiful in New Zealand. So yes, if you're short of time, take that flight to Queenstown. Otherwise, stick to Auckland and Christchurch.
I think the way Queenstown is built, it's a valley, right?
Yeah.
And the clouds just
Yeah.
like stick inside of the valley, and then sometimes for pilots it can be quite difficult. Okay, so you have established Auckland, Christchurch as two of the main gateway points trying to come into New Zealand. Okay, so if we are to look at Google Maps, right, how Auckland is positioned and Christchurch is positioned on the map comparatively to all of the other cities that are there, do you think it also becomes a good entry point, one of these cities, and the other cities could be an exit point where you could do all of that? But if I have to go from the North Island to the South Island without touching either of these places, are there ferries where I can just drive my car into and then move to the other island?
Sure. So Neil, Auckland is more, it's on the harbour, right? So it's a harbour town, and everything to do with sailing, like the America's Cup and all of that. All the famous sailing things happen in Auckland. So it is a place to go if you love yachting. Christchurch is more like a garden city. and it's really pretty. So again, gardens, flowers, walks, all of that is Christchurch. Now you can, of course, like I said, enter into Auckland and exit out of Christchurch, or the other way around as well, whatever works. But if you want to do both the islands, then you can fly in from Auckland to Christchurch, take a car, go down to Queenstown, do everything that you want to do, do the France, the glacier regions, Otago, the Otago Peninsula, whatever you want to visit, do a round trip Christchurch to Christchurch and come back to Christchurch and fly out. Or you can fly down, you can take the car or a bus or whatever you want to, come down to Queenstown if you're doing just a one way thing, and then fly into Auckland and fly out as well. So that's also possible. Now, the ferries you spoke about, and I think that's the best part of New Zealand, that whichever mode of transport you take, and if you're driving, it's not just a drive or a flight or a ferry. It's actually like they say, the journey is the destination. It's absolutely like that. So you have ferries between the two islands as well. So when you come to Wellington, New Zealand's capital, you can take a ferry and go down to Picton. And then the best part is if you're driving in North Island, you can also take the car on the ferry, or you can take a car for the North Island, leave the car there, take the ferry across, pick up your next car and start driving again if you want to do a self-drive. So the ferries run between Wellington and Picton, and a lot of times you'll also see dolphins and,
Wow.
when you're on the ferry. So it's not just a transport. Don't go and sit inside, stay out and enjoy the view.
Nice. Now, let's come to what is there to see in either of these places. Let's start with North Island. If you were to name 5 things that come to your mind that could be great spots for someone to visit who is going to the North Island for the first time, what would they be?
Okay, every time we try to keep these episodes for a certain
Yeah.
amount of time, and then we overshoot them because there's just so much to speak.
Yeah, always.
So Neil, even the North Island itself is, deserves an episode on its own, and
Yeah,
maybe
we
later
will-
on
we
we
will
will
do
do
that,
that,
yes.
right? Okay, but to start off with, I think let's start at the very north. I would like to start then, which is the Bay of Islands.
Okay.
Beautiful place, and a lot of people actually miss this. They don't go, they come into Auckland, they do Rotorua, maybe Napier and Wellington, and they immediately come down to the South Island. I would say take that time and go up to the Bay of Islands. Some people do it as a day trip, but it's a really long day trip. It's more than 12 to 14 hours if you just do it from Auckland. So go and stay there. And what can you see here? We mentioned before. So this is probably going to be the warmest place in all of New Zealand. So in the Bay of Islands is stunning. I think there are more than 144 islands out there, and you can take a boat and cruise among these islands.
Wow.
There's a little town called Russell, and I've been there, and it's got a lot of colonial charm. I remember sitting by the ocean by the shore and having a fabulous meal out there with fish and stuff. And they had very quirky little races going on with leftover things and stuff like that. So it's a very sweet little town out there. You can see the two oceans meet. You can go swimming with dolphins out here, and you can do whale watching too. So Bay of Islands, coming to culture, one of the most important things is the Waitangi Treaty.
Okay.
And this is where New Zealand as a country was formed. So there was peace, but one of the friendliest countries. And I think you will see that amongst all these countries where, there were colonials and there were the indigenous local people, probably New Zealand is the place which was the friendliest and the most peaceful. So these were the peace treaty grounds where the foundation of New Zealand was laid.
Okay, so Sunila, Bay of Islands is the first thing. And one thing I would pick up from this thing is that you mentioned that it is one of the friendliest countries in the world. And one of the best things is how the Maori culture is so ingrained in the people of New Zealand, where wherever you go, the people are just welcoming and you don't feel like you're an outsider, because whether you go to a restaurant, whether you go to a cafe, the hotels that are there, anywhere you go, people will just welcome you. And I think that is something that stayed with me from my last trip to New Zealand. So, okay, Bay of Islands was the first thing. What is number 2?
Let's come to Auckland, one
Okay.
of the most important cities, in terms of entryway into New Zealand. Or I think those people who have relatives probably have most of them live in Auckland. You will end up going to Auckland any which ways when you go to New Zealand, right? So what do you do here? I think it's one of the most livable cities in the world. Auckland Sky Tower gives you this beautiful panoramic view. So I'm usually not a very big fan of observatories and towers. I just find them boring. But I think it gives you a good perspective of the whole city.
Yeah.
So if it's your first trip, definitely go up the Auckland Sky Tower. Go up, have a nice look because it puts everything into perspective and where you are. The Auckland Harbour is really nice. So, the viaduct and the harbour. Go out there and there are lots of restaurants there. Again, you can go on a yacht from here, go sailing, do other things. But just to sit there with the restaurant and, hear the seagulls and everything, that's really nice. Another thing is you can go to Waiheke Islands, which are not too far from Auckland, and there are wineries and other things so close to the city. So even for those business travelers who just end up going to Auckland and coming back, you can easily spend like a 3-4 night for even a corporate tour. So it's
Yeah.
pretty good because the facilities and everything else is excellent and you can spend a good time there. Most people would come into Auckland, maybe spend a day or two and then start exploring the rest of New Zealand. So I would say Auckland is
I
something you
asked you
can't
for
miss.
the second thing, but you
And
gave me
then,
the second thing and the third thing. One was
yes.
Auckland, and the third thing was, of course, the Waiheke Islands. But here I'd like to stress on the food and the wine, right? Because we say go to New Zealand for the adventure. We say go to New Zealand for the landscape.
Yes.
We say go to New Zealand for the friendly people. But often people forget that New Zealand has great food and great wine. And the wine that you'll have in New Zealand is more different to the wine that you'll probably have in France. And I actually love it because most of it is more on the sweeter side. So I quite like it. And when it comes to the food, the first thing that I often do, often as in, it's not like I go to New Zealand every alternate day, but whenever I have had a chance to go to New Zealand, I know the food produced there is incredible. And that's why I just go into a cafe and order avocado on toast because the avocado, of course, New Zealand is known for its avocados, is just incredible. So, okay, we have got the ball rolling on the North Island. Let's complete the North Island first and then come to the South Island. So, what is next on your list?
I think Rotorua. It has to be Rotorua.
Yeah.
Like Lake Rotorua, you're in Rotorua because you can smell the sulfur when you land there. Rotorua, if Queenstown is the adventure capital of the South Island, Rotorua is the adventure capital of the North Island. And I think the good part is in New Zealand, I've seen them take so much precaution and, the safety standards are so high that I don't have, two thoughts about taking that jump when it comes to bungee jumping or skydiving or whatever. Neil, even you've done the bungee in New Zealand. What are your thoughts on the safety here?
I think if you look at safety or adventure sports, they often say that New Zealand is probably one of the safest places to do it, right? Because one, they have regular audits, and those audits are not like half yearly or something. It's like monthly audits or weekly audits that they do. The harnesses are state of the art, and I think adventure sports kind of took birth in New Zealand is how I would put it. So I've done river rafting, I've done bungee, like, of that Kawarau bridge, and I've done multiple other adventure activities. So I would say it's pretty safe. So whether you're doing it in the North Island or the South Island, it is something that I would definitely recommend.
So, coming back to Rotorua, and I agree with you, it is definitely, and you'll see that everywhere in New Zealand, north, south, wherever you go. Rotorua becomes important because you can do a lot of things here. One, I mentioned, of course, the adventure sports here, zorbing, skyline, you name it, you can do it out there. But it's a great place to see the Maori culture and also relax. Like wellness in Rotorua, I think is one of the best. We recently had two couples traveling, kind of middle-aged couples, and they went in and they were soaking themselves in the hot pools, private is what we book for them. So they were in the hot pools and then followed by, massages and actually even like boiling mud. So you can have spa treatments with the volcanic mud out here. So wellness is a very big part of what you would do, in Rotorua and the Maori culture because you have Tepuia, you have Whakarewa, all these places where you can see the hot geysers as well, but you get a glimpse of the Maori culture. You get to know how is the haka, how do they do it, why do they do it. And again, you go through that process. And here I want to say that when you go to New Zealand, try and do at least one thing in which you have something to do with the Maoris.
Okay, that's a
Because
great tip.
what they do is at the start they have like this welcome thing that they do, and once they welcome you, you become a part of their family. That is how they consider. It's not just friends, you become part of the family. And we had such an experience. And once they welcomed in, the food, the songs, everything was just flowing. And I think that, influences everybody in New Zealand, which in
Yeah.
turn also makes people really friendly. So, Rotorua, definitely, wellness, Maori culture, and then, of course, adventure. There are also underground rivers here, black rivers in which you can do all kinds of canyoning and rafting and all other things as well.
Awesome. So you've already told us a lot of great things, but of course, there's one more thing that comes to my mind, which is connected to the Lord of the Rings, where we have Hobbiton in New Zealand, in the North Island, that you can really witness. And of course, when we do our episode about the North Island, we will cover this in detail, but you can really go and see those houses where Lord of the Rings was
At
filmed
Hobbiton,
and
yeah.
everything, right? So that's something that comes to my mind. So quickly, before we go to the South Island, anything else that you just would like to name, and then we move to the South Island?
Yeah, I mean, don't miss the wine and the art deco in Napier. Don't miss Coromandel because it has hot water beaches and you can actually go and dig your own little hot water pool, depending on the tide,
Yeah.
and soak in your own free hot
Oh,
water
nice.
pool
That's
on the
a great
beach.
experience.
So, a lot to do. And of course, the capital city. The museum there is really interesting. So is the food and wine. So, I would say, there are so many other things. But since we have a lot to talk about South Island, let's go down south.
Okay, let's come to the South Island. Now, South Island, I would like to start, of course, with talking about Queenstown, because everyone knows about Queenstown, but everyone knows of it as an adventure destination and not anything else. But I would like to say that it's not only adventure. If you just want to go on a walk within the city of Queenstown, it's great. It's by the lake, there are these towering mountains around you, and the weather is just incredible. And an experience that I have been left with is that I did a self-drive holiday, but a self-drive where we took a camper van in New Zealand.
Oh,
So
wow.
the camper van experience is very different because you have to go into camper van parks, you have to charge your camper van so you get electricity overnight, and that has just left a mark with me. So I would say the first thing is Queenstown. Now, everyone knows about the adventure things, but would you like to tell us something more about Queenstown and surrounds?
The last time I was planning a New Zealand itinerary, and when we started discussing Queenstown, and it came to how many days should I spend here, and typically people say at least 2 to 3. And the minute you actually start laying down the itinerary, you feel like maybe I should be here for a week or so, and do different
Yeah.
things. So lots of things to do in Queenstown. Like you said, even do nothing in Queenstown is just amazing. Come walk by the lake, see other things, But one of the most important things that you would do is go and visit Milford Sound. And then there is also another sound, and that is Doubtful Sound.
What is the difference?
So a sound is nothing but an inlet of the sea that comes in. It's like a fjord and very, very similar to a fjord. And these sounds, Milford and Doubtful, Milford is more steep, like the mountains are just taller and really steep, and Doubtful is a little more open.
Okay.
So it really depends on the itinerary and what you are doing, and then you can choose whether to do Milford Sound or Doubtful Sound, or if you have the time and you really love cruising and being in nature and being on a boat, you can do both. Now, one thing here I want to mention is that if you are going on an individual holiday, you can actually stay there in the Sound. So you can do an overnight cruise on the Sound, and then you can have your kayaks and everything and just peacefully kayak because in the day when all the cruise ships come, even otherwise you rarely see the other ships or you see them from far. But if you really want to experience the beauty of nature, then take a overnight cruise here.
I have personally not been to either of these, but everything that I've read about them is like you have great landscape, you have great scenery, you have great wildlife.
Yeah.
And I think it's not just the destination but the actual journey that you take to either of these places, which is quite unique, right? So you can go there by car and you can go there by helicopter.
You're right. You're right.
Is that right?
So it's a long journey, and then you have to account for a full day. So you can either take a helicopter both ways from Queenstown to Milford Sound, or you can drive one way and take the helicopter on the way back. Because when you're going, the drive is also beautiful, and I would say don't miss that. Of course, even the coaches that go there, they have these nice big windows, and you can really enjoy the journey. And then on the way back, you can take a helicopter on your way back. So that works as well.
Okay, that's great. So Queenstown we spoke about, Milford, Doubtful we spoke about. What should we speak of next when it comes to South Island?
So, at the very northern tip of the South Island, you have Abel Tasman and Marlborough. Again, known for wines, but the Abel Tasman National Park, I think, has one of the most, the clearest waters on earth. And kayaking here is something that I would heavily
Oh
recommend.
yeah.
So, definitely get in, but you have to be a little active to be able to visit the Abel Tasman. And even the hike there is something, the Abel Tasman Trail is something that a lot of people like to do, biking and hiking, but it's more for, active and adventure lovers.
I'm glad you spoke about hiking or the trails that are there, because I would like to make a point over here that if you like walking, if you like trails, New Zealand offers trails that could be 15 minutes long or it could be 15 days long. Like, those trails,
Yeah.
and the way the country has been built, you'll have trails everywhere. You'll have trails on the beach, you'll have trails in the forest, you'll have trails just on regular roads. And that's one of the best things, where if you want to be in nature, you just want to be with your loved ones and you just want to keep going, you can find a trail that suits your difficulty level, that suits the amount of time you have in the day, and how you want to just go about seeing it, or your interests as such. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, and that is something that I would definitely recommend to our listeners to go check out. So along with that, there is also another place called Wānaka, right? So what's Wānaka famous for?
So Wanaka has the puzzling word. It's this beautiful attraction where the house is upside down and all of that. But one of the recent, or I would say one of the attractions there is on Instagram, especially, is something called that Wanaka tree, which is the single tree that is growing in water. Wanaka is very beautiful and again very close to Queenstown. So about an hour you can go there and come back from Queenstown if you make Queenstown your base. Or many people like to go and stay there as well. You
Yeah.
know, so you can go in there and stay there for the night too. So there are some beautiful luxury lodges here in Queenstown and in Wānaka too. So if you're on your honeymoon or you're on a romantic holiday and you want to splurge and stay in what is known as a luxury lodge, these places are definitely something that you can, visit.
New Zealand is often thought of as the destination that you should go for your honeymoon to, because
Yeah.
it can be a long holiday and you're ready to splurge on your honeymoon. But that doesn't mean if you're not going on your honeymoon, don't splurge. But yeah, like New Zealand is often thought of. So what else is there to see in South
Sunil,
Island?
we were comparing north and south, and I think this is a good point here to compare the two in terms of the landscape. What we said, so the north we said has boiling geysers and hot water and all of that, which we saw in Rotorua. The south has the snow, so it's the opposite. So it's like if you say fire and ice, you have the fire in the north and the ice in the south.
That's a good way.
And the snow in the south. So to experience that, you'll go to one of the glacier region. So you can go to Franz Joseph, you can go to Fox, which is a small town, or you can go to Mount Cook. So you have 2-3 options. Probably you'll end up staying at Mount Cook or Franz Joseph. And then you can take a helicopter and actually go land on a glacier, or you can go hike in the glacier. So anything and everything to do with snow and glaciers, you get your fill here. So that's something you must do, like at least one night.
I think we have given our listeners enough to do in the North Island and the South Island. But one question I wanted to ask you, and it's not one, it's actually 3 questions. If I'm doing North Island, how many days do you recommend? If I'm doing South Island, how many days do you recommend? And if I'm doing North and South together, how many days do you recommend? And see, this depends on the type of traveler you are and everything. But come on, thousands of tourists are traveling with Veena World, right? So, like, what are some of your recommendations?
I would say for the North Island, minimum 5 days, minimum to a week. For the South Island, I would go from 7 days to about 10 to 12 days. And for both of them together, at least 15 days. I mean, at least 2 weeks. If you don't have the time, of course, shorter itineraries are possible. You can do both the islands in 10 days or even a week as well. But that depends on what you're going to see. But if you are really planning that nice holiday to New Zealand, then at least keep 15 days for both the islands. Because to do a round trip of the South Island itself is going to take like 10, 12 days easily. And I've had people who've done both the islands and then come back and said, I want to do only one island now again and again and again. And they keep coming back to do that. So it depends.
I'm glad you put it that way, because my next question, and probably the last question of our episode, is connected to this, where you have been to New Zealand a few times. On your next trip, what would you like to do?
For my next trip, I have my wish list ready, and that is two things actually. So the first one is in the North Island to take a seaplane and start off from Lake Rotorua, fly the seaplane and land into Lake Rotoiti, and here soak in hot pools.
Oh, wow.
So a float plane and a hot pool experience is one thing that I want to do. The second thing I want to do really is to visit the third island of New Zealand.
The third island. What is the
we
third
usually
island?
talk of the north and the south, but there's Stewart Island, which is to the further south of New Zealand. And if you want to see, the symbol of New Zealand is the kiwi bird, right? So everywhere else in New Zealand, you'll only see it in the conservation. But if you want to see it in the wild, then you have to go to Stewart Island. So you have to come down to Invercargill, which is a southernmost city in New Zealand, and then take a ferry from here, 1 hour ferry, and you're on Stewart Island. And then here you can go for walks. You can really enjoy nature, untamed nature, as we say, with absolutely very few people out there. So that is definitely on my list. And from here, you can take another ferry and go to another place, which is known as Ulva, and actually also do a walk out there. So amazing for nature lovers and bird watching and everything.
Awesome. So we started with the topic North Island versus South Island. You introduced us to the third island of New Zealand, which gives us enough topics for future episodes of Travel, Explore, Celebrate Life. But thanks for shedding light on this fun, great rivalry that is North Island versus South Island. I'm sure our listeners also took a lot from this episode. So guys, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Travel, Explore, Celebrate Life. Do you think we missed anything comparing both of these islands? Let us know in the comments or by writing to us on our email neil@veenaworld.com, sunila@veenaworld.com. Until next time, keep celebrating life and see you on the next episode. Bye.